Hello, everybody. Welcome to the today's seminar about QSoftware. My name is Anton Goosen. I represent Quistor. Quistor, as you can see, is over 10 years in business. We have offices across Europe, and we have a number of value propositions, predominantly around JDE Edwards, including cloud, BI, mobile, custom development, and managed services. I won't bother you too much with the story about Quistor because today's goal is to talk about our 10-year relationship with QSoftware. Our partner with them since 2008. Owen, are you on the line?
I am. Can you hear me, Anton?
Yes, I can hear you very well.
Good.
I will give the screen to you so that you can start your part.
Okay.
1 second, Owen. If all goes well, we have your screen now in front of us.
Does that work?
Yes, we can see you, Owen. Go ahead.
Perfect. My wife's not very pleased about the photograph, but anyway. Good afternoon, everyone, or good evening. What we're going to do is cover in the next hour or so, we're going to look at implementing security in JDE Edwards 9.2. We're going to focus on, first of all, the JDE Edwards EnterpriseOne security hierarchy, the core security types, and of course the new UDO security that has been introduced with 9.2. We will also spend a little bit of time, although you could say hierarchy, but we will spend a little bit of time focusing on the JDE Edwards role sequencing and the sequence manager and its impact. So what I would like to do, just first of all, assuming if you were upgrading or you haven't taken advantage of multiple roles yet, this is just a few notes about preparing for multiple roles. I mean, I say the new feature, it's not really new anymore, but still, a lot of people still haven't taken advantage of the multiple role functionality. But it was introduced because at XE and ERP8 we had one group per user. The advent of EnterpriseOne 8.9, they brought in multiple roles. You can migrate your existing security if you have a single role security policy. You can stick with single roles, but it's a good idea to go to multiple roles as soon because it facilitates a more granular security approach and, of course, allows more reusability, which, of course, eases maintenance. And there is the physical limit on the number of roles per user is 25, but it's recommended you don't exceed 20 roles per user. And remember, roles are environment specific, so if you've got a user that's expected to sign on to multiple roles, the limitation becomes greater because they may need 8 roles in DV, 5 roles in PY, and 6 roles in PD. So that role, that environment specific functionality is very useful, but also another limitation. But for those of you who've had to live with multiple copies of the F00950, you don't have to do that now because you can make a role environment specific. If your menu structure is being updated, the security access should really reflect your fine cut. This is a general comment about security. So if you are going to use fine cut or menu filtering, it should really fully reflect the security policy that will be used to support that. So I know some people still don't use menu filtering or fine cut, but if you do, it can effectively design your security policy for you. Roles should also be carefully planned to minimize problems due to the role sequence manager, which we'll look at in the moment. In other words, when you're adding a role to JD Edwards, if you allow it, next numbers will assign the role sequence, and that's not a good idea. You should really plan the role sequencing yourself and assign the numbers yourself. So as we've touched on the Enterprise Sequence Manager, what I'd like to do now is just go into this in more detail. So what are the Sequence Manager issues? Well, they basically control management of security conflicts when the user signs on with all their roles. Now, you know, in the setup, it is possible that you allow users to actually choose roles at sign-on, and there is nothing wrong with that, if that's how you want to design your security policy. But most people, either through the web server or through the F95921 itself, they will want to work with all roles, or want the users to sign on with star all roles. As I mentioned earlier, the sequence numbers are assigned when the role is added, but you can override it. The highest sequence number takes precedence in a security conflict situation. So as you've got users signing on with multiple roles, with star all roles, it is inevitable, unless you're the best security designer in the world, it is inevitable that there's going to be some conflict. And what that means is it might be that one role is allowed inquiry access on an application, for example, the voucher entry, and another role assigns update access on the same application. When the user signs on with star all roles, they can't do both inquiry and update. So the way JD Edwards dealt with those conflicts is the role with the highest sequence number will actually take precedence. So if by accident your inquiry role has a higher sequence number than your update role, when the user signs on with all roles, they will end up only with the inquiry access. And this can be quite complex and difficult to troubleshoot, because people will look at the roles, see that they got update access, and find it difficult to understand why when the user signs on, they still can only do inquiry. They don't have the update functions. So carefully planned roles can prevent problems with Sequence Manager. Instead of allowing next numbers to assign the sequence number, it's a good idea to plan your roles into ranges and by types of roles. So you could have maybe the clerk is 0 through 1,000, manager is 2,000 through 4,000, and so it goes on. You should then override the next numbers. Never let next numbers decide on what the sequence number will be. You plan it and you override and you place the sequence number when you're adding the role. For your information, the table that contains the role sequencing is the F00926, and if necessary, there is a facility of resequencing through JD Edwards, but it can get a bit messy, and we'll talk about that in a moment. So you may end up having to sequel to get your desired result. You may end up having to sequel into the F00926. So this is what it looks like when you're adding a role. For those who haven't seen this before, you can see the sequence number supplied by next numbers. That is what you'd be overriding now if you had planned your role hierarchy. Just for your information, under the P0092, which is the application we were just looking at, the form menu is how you get to add the role. If you click add when you first enter the P0092, it will only allow you to add a user. So you have to go to the form menu. The role sequence could also be viewed and modified from this from the form menu as well. And that's what we're going to focus on now. And I'd just like to talk about this a little bit. Now, you may notice, well, you can't see, but you can actually do drag and drop or cut and paste, depending whether you're using the web interface or the FAT client interface, to restructure the role sequencing. When you click Set Sequence, it will do exactly that. So you can see at the moment AP Clerk and AP Super have sequence number 100 versus 110. If I wanted to change that sequence, I could do a cut and paste or a copy and paste or a drag and drop and then set sequence. But for those of you who have planned your, and by the way, sorry, you can't see it, but the set sequence is on the form menu. For those of you who have planned your role hierarchy and you put in room for expansion, so you've done 1 through 1,000 for the clerks and 1,001 through 2,000 for the managers, and so it goes on, you would have left gaps in this hierarchy for expansion because you may need to add new roles in the future. And the problem is if you hit that set sequence form exit, your gaps will it will compress, and it basically leaves you with just a 10-digit difference between each one of the roles, like you can see at the moment. It only 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, and so it goes on. So if you had added your roles with a carefully planned sequencing policy in place, and then you hit the set sequence, then any gaps you may have left for future expansion will be lost. So do be careful of doing that with a planned hierarchy. In this particular example, we're just looking, 2 roles have been assigned here. We've got AP Clerk, AP Super, and Train role. And I'm looking at AP Clerk and AP Super in particular. And remember that AP Clerk was sequence number 100 and AP Super was 110. So as you can see, AP Super has delete, but Clerk doesn't. So in this particular situation, when the user signs on with star or role, the conflicts that are in place here will be resolved, but in the process of resolving, it will pick up the role with the highest sequence number, which means which is what you are most probably trying to achieve. And the screen here shows you full access with AP Super. But to illustrate how important the sequence number is, what we've done here now is we've rearranged the sequence. AP Clerk is now 110 and AP Super is 90. Now we have changed the hierarchy, and in a conflict situation, Clerk will take precedence over Super. And now you can see the delete button has gone. Don't forget, of course, this is all environment specific. So if Clerk didn't have access to the same environments as Super, or AP Clerk didn't have the same access to the same environments as AP Super, then this may not become a problem because the environment they're signed on to nullifies the effect of the multiple roles being assigned. What we're going to do now. What we're going to do now is talk about the JDE Edwards EnterpriseOne security hierarchy and the core security types. This is basically the order in which the users, stroke roles, and start public, of course, we mustn't forget about start public, are checked. And then we'll look at the different security types that are possible within E1 currently. So, and this is just showing you what we're going to cover. We're going to look at the sequencing, public roles and user, and the security. And notice we've broken the security parameters into 3. The object security, application, action, and processing, which are the ones you generally focus on when you're doing an all doors closed or a denial security policy. Also the data confidentiality, which is row and column. Row allows you to restrict people to specific data sets. Column allows you to make a column go away. For example, the salary fee column. You might not want it to be visible. And the last one's the access control. It's a little bit of generic description, but they control other forms of access, i.e. hyperexits, push buttons, etc. Now, first we're going to look at the security sequencing. And you can see the hierarchy. This is very simplified at the moment. It will get more complicated as we go further through the presentation. But basically, you can see within each layer, we have a hierarchy of security on an individual object override star all. For those of you who go down to form level, of course, security on an individual form within an interactive application will override the security on an individual object, which will override the reserve word star all. Now, if you're using the reserve word star all, what that means is you're basically saying, I'd like to secure all of the objects for this particular security type, and we'll discuss that in a moment. Notice, because we're dealing with multi-role release, we put in there role 1, which is overriding role 2, which is overriding role X. Of course, role 1 sequence number must be higher than role 2 sequence number, which must be higher than role X's sequence number, and so it goes on. And of course, within each one of those layers, we're still going through this hierarchy check of security on an individual object overrides what you've set on star all for a particular security type, assuming that security type supports star all. Last of all is star public, which is checked last, which impacts on everyone. It's like having a role that's assigned to everyone with the lowest sequence number, if you like. And the star all being overridden by the individual object is very useful for people who are doing an all doors closed security policy again. Because you might say star all, no, you can't run any applications. But of course there are standard applications which are used by everyone, like printer selection, password change, batch versions interface so that they can choose a report and so a version, and so it goes on. So that's why being able to override star all with the individual object security is very useful. Star all at the public would generally be no, and at the individual object would be grant back yes. Oops, oh dear, sorry. Excuse me, I've just jumped to the end of the presentation. Wrong button. Please excuse me. We were here. Perfect. So, let's focus on application security. One of the three core object security types that people focus on when they're dealing with all doors closed. And the first, of course, is application security. This allows you to control who can run which particular applications. Don't forget that JD Edwards, if you do nothing, the security is wide open for application security. In fact, for the majority of the security types. In fact, I will point out to you any that are different. But with the standard, the older JDE security types, like application security, it's wide open until you shut it. So it secures interactive applications and UBEs, it supports star all, and you can secure individual forms, and of course form access overrides Apple or interactive application access. The beauty of application security is it's global, so as long as you've secured them from running something, you've stopped them, it won't appear in their menu structure. If they take an exit that will allow them to run that application, they'll get a message you're not authorized. And if they've got fast path by any chance, not recommended of course, but if they have, then it will also pop up when they run the application in the fast path, it will pop up again with a you're not authorized. Note it supports version security, so a user may be able to run version X but not version Y. In the example of the address book, it might be they're able to see suppliers, but they can't work with customers. They can't run the customer's version, but they can run the supplier's version. Secured objects are not visible in the menu structure. We already mentioned that. So here we have an example here, the address book revisions application, which I just mentioned. It's accessible. You can see we've drilled through all the breadcrumbs, and we finally got to the address book revisions application. It's visible in the menu structure, and if I click on that, I will run that program. Now you can see through the P00950, we've chosen the train role, and we are actually shutting down that application. Run and install. For those of you who've ever wondered about what install is all about, run says does what it says. It means whether they can run or not this particular application. Install is obsolete now. I mean, it goes back to the days when everyone had fat clients and they only had a 1 gig hard drive, and the JD Edwards package was 1.5 gigabytes, and it was too big for the machine. So you could set that the specs would be run down or installed or JITted, just in time installed. You could set it so that it would JITty whenever if the user tried to use the application for the first time. So very obsolete. Now you're all using web servers. It's just historical. So now we set up the security. Notice that the option to do the address book revisions is no longer visible within the menu structure. And you can see if we type it in the fast path and trying to run the application, we get a message, you're not authorized or you do not have permission. Of course, that's what would happen is if the address book revisions was behind a push button or a link or an exit, and the user tried to use that as well. The second of the object type security types, which is also very important, arguably more important than the ability to run the application, is the action security, which controls what they can do. Once they actually get into the interactive application. Of course, it has no effect on reports because there are no actions in reports. That's driven by processing options. But here you can see we can secure add, copy, delete, select OK, or change. Now, you might say, well, I've never seen a change button, and you might be correct, but you have seen a save button, which allows you to save changes. Action security supports star all. You can go down a form level if you wish, and again you can go to version level. And it also secures scroll to end. Now, scroll to end is whether it's a security issue is another matter. It's more of a networking issue, in that the scroll to end basically allows a user, when they click on scroll to end, they can download all the records down to the last record, controlled, of course, by any QBE parameters they may have put in, query by example. If someone went to your general ledger and there were 15 million rows of data in there, and they didn't put in any filtering and they just did scroll to end, then you might find an impact for the rest of your users who are trying to use that web server or the network. So scroll to end is very useful for your financial people, your accountants, but maybe not for your average user. So here's an example. We've got full access. The check is OK select. It allows me to view detail. Find you can't secure. That's always there. But add, copy, and delete can be secured. There's no change, but if you selected a record, it would take you to another form, and the OK on there would be, or the diskette, the save, would be the ability to do change. Through the train role, we are restricting them to OK select only, which means they can just view the detail. They can't actually do anything else. And when the user, don't forget, of course, that any security changes involve refreshing the cache on your web server. It won't be instantaneous. It depends how often the cache is refreshed. But you can then, you can see now we're now restricted to the OK select only. Find is always there, and of course the red cross is closed. And thirdly, of the object security types, we're looking at processing options to security. Now, in JD Edwards, processing options are very important. They're basically the parameters of how a batch process, a UBE, or an interactive application are going to run. They contain the business rules. When you're doing your implementation of JD Edwards, which can take many months, you might have been wondering what the project team were doing, working away all the hours that God sends, 15-hour days, etc. What they were doing were creating the versions to store the appropriate option. So as you can imagine, protecting those processing options is very important. This is the one, when I've been working with customers, this is the one security type they all forget. They all think of application and action, but they always forget about processing option. And auditors are getting more and more diligent about whether processing options could be shut down, because if a user can change the processing options on an interactive application, for example, they could corrupt your business processes and leave you with a corrupted database. It allows you to also secure whether the user can list a version list. Now, you've all done menu design and added a report or a UBE and prompted through the menu structure that they can choose the version you want them to see. But, of course, the security also has to permit that. It's known as prompt for version. Processing option security can be version specific, so you can actually stipulate that for one version they can change the processing options, but I'm thinking of batch processes here more than interactive. And for another version, the processing options aren't available to them. So here is an example. Now, what we've done is we've drilled through the menu structure. We've got to the voucher entry application, and you see the triangle to the right of the voucher entry application. We've just selected that triangle, and you can see there's two values here, values and version, which relate to processing options. The others are standard and can't be secured, although you can secure adding to favorites. But we're focusing on prompt for values or prompt for version here. Don't forget, when you're setting up your processing option security, it has to complement your menu design. So if you've added a report to a menu and you've allowed the user in the menu design, you've said it's a blind execution, you can set up the security so that they can't do anything through the processing options and they can only just submit the report. Here I'm setting up on the journal entry application, I'm setting up the processing options to shut down access, and you'll see the difference now is you can see that, I'm sorry, it was the journal entry before, you can see now that the prompt for version and prompt for values have disappeared. They were closed. By the way, notice when you're dealing with interactive applications, you can't set up for data selection because that's not appropriate for, because what will happen is they'll be grayed out for interactive applications. The data selection part only applies when you're dealing with batch processes or UBEs. Now, moving on to the data security. Row security, as I said before, allows you to restrict people to certain data sets. Most people think in terms of read, but in other words, viewing the data, but you can also just say, well, you can view the data, but you can't do deletes. You can do adds and changes, but you can't do deletes. So you can be quite prescriptive, quite strict through row security about what the users can do to the data. Row security is driven by the table name and the content of the column. In other words, in the FO911, on the business unit field, you might only want to see them business unit 10 through 50. So you'd set up the appropriate row security, restricting them in that range on that table, and then from then on they would be restricted. A star rule is supported for the table name, but please use it with care because row security does have a cumulative effect on performance. If you put a lot of row security, it means every time that the user interacts with the database, there's always an SQL state being inserted, which is going to need to be executed, which will impact on the performance of your system. There's two types of row security. The JDE would ship it as exclusive, which means when you're setting up row security, you are basically saying what they can't see, and that includes an omit statement in the SQL, or you can convert your F00950, it's just clicking on a radio button to be precise, to inclusive, which means you say what they can see, and there's no omit statement, so it is actually better for performance. There's in excess of 300 columns already set up for row security. which columns are set up for row security or data items are set up for row security is really dictated to by the column type or data item type. In other words, is it a description field or is it a UDC field or a numeric field? And it's also controlled by the number of indexes, because of course if you're going to every transaction is going to involve an SQL statement. If you want to speed up the SQL, you've got to have the appropriate indexes in place. So when JD Edwards says that a data item is appropriate for row security, they're actually also telling you and there's enough indexes in place. This is looking at the data dictionary now. You'll see there's a checkbox for row security. We're looking at the MCU field here, which is must be the most commonly used for row security. And you can see it's checked saying it is set up for row security. Now, there's nothing stopping you just going into the data dictionary on an item, because if you try and set up row security on an item that isn't enabled through the data dictionary, you'll get a warning, well, you'll get an error message and it will say not set up for row security. If you just go and check this checkbox without building the appropriate indexes, then you're going to really hammer the performance on your system. So it's forcing you to step back and review if you want to set up that row security on a particular item, like a category code, then don't just check this checkbox, review the appropriate indexes as well. Here's an example of inclusive row security. Remember, exclusive, you normally say what they can't see. Inclusive, you say what they can see. Now, if there's no row security in place, then everybody can see all the data. But as soon as you put in this statement, like the F0911 statement, the top row, for the train role, any user that has that role assigned to them will be restricted to business units 1 through 22 from now on. So do nothing, nothing happens. As soon as you put it in place, you put a restriction. The rest of the F0911 will be invisible to any user that has that role assigned. This is quite a crude picture of the row security hierarchy, but I just wanted to highlight to you that how JD Edwards checks whether you're authorized to see a data item is in the same hierarchy as we've already discussed: user, roles, taking into account the role sequence, where there may be a conflict, and star public. What it does is it just looks through the hierarchy. If it finds for a particular table and a particular data item a row security entry, it looks no further. So it's very important when you're planning your row security that you make sure that that you don't have conflicting row security, because it will not concatenate that. Once it's found a particular data item on a particular table, it doesn't look any further in the JD Edwards hierarchy. Column security works the other way. It basically allows you to make a data item invisible, or make it read-only, or make it so that they can't add, but they can change data in a particular column, or they can add but can't change. You can do any permutation of the values you can see there. It's driven by the table, the application, the form. So this is actually the JD Edwards tool set that will be implementing column security. It doesn't implement SQL statements or anything like that. It just reads at runtime when you open up an application or you run a report. Is the user allowed to see this column? Yes, no. Are they allowed to update it? Yes, no. If they're not allowed to update it, then it's grayed out. Star rule is supported on the table name. Use with care. Well, if you don't want salary to be seen by anyone, then it makes sense to do star all on salary and say no, and you could set that at the public. It's available on all columns because there's no indexes involved, and again, it can be version specific for applications and forms. So here in this example, we've got 2 columns that we're not using anymore. They're obsolete. We want to get rid of them. And you can see now, again, for the train role on the F0101, on the 2 data items, we're making them disappear. And now, when the user goes into the application, they disappear. Now we're moving on to the generic controls security, first of which is hyperexit. And this allows you to disable any exit that's visible on an application form. It's not a replacement for application security. Some people in the past have, when they've been all doors open, they've shut down particular exits to try and restrict people's access. There is no substitute for doing all doors closed. But it can be, there are certain exits that may carry out an update. So they are ones that you may, for SOD purposes or for just data integrity purposes, you want to control who can use those exits. Otherwise, exits just make the interface more user-friendly. If someone keeps getting a "you're not authorized" message because the program behind the exit they're not authorized to run, then it might make sense to get rid of it. If you've got the time, it might make sense to get rid of the exit itself. Here's an example. We've got AR and AP and bank account. My user is, through their roles, is not allowed to run any of those applications. Now you can see it's form-specific exit security. So there's 2 forms, the A form and the B form, which have those exits on there. So we're having to secure them in both. As you can see, can be quite time-consuming, but it does make the user interface much more friendly. And now you'll see the exits are no longer visible. Moving on to tab security. A lot of applications have tabs, interactive applications. You may not be using them. Why are the tabs there? Well, I mean, in the example that follows, there's a lot of information to fit onto one form. It's not possible, so they've grouped the data types into different tabs, and you can see the cat codes are on the end. And it might be that we want them to be able to update the cat code 1 to 10 or add cat code 1 to 10, but not update them. And we might want them to not work with 11 through 30 because they're not being used yet. So here you can see, again, we're dealing with the cat codes. We're saying whether they can be viewed or changed. And now you can see that cat code 11 to 30 has disappeared. The tab's gone. And when we're doing a change, the cat codes 1 to 10 are grayed out. But if we were doing an add, they would be accessible for update. External calls becoming obsolete now. Very few people have access to a client. The external calls allows you to secure the Windows executables that are shipped as part of EnterpriseOne. For instance, the UTB browse, the RDA.exe, the FDA.exe. You're really into sysadmin or developers territory here, but it allows you to control who can do what through their FAT client. If they're clever enough to work out that they can drill through the directory structure rather than doing it through JD Edwards menu structure, even if they kick off an executable that's one of the JD Edwards EnterpriseOne executables, even if they're not signed on, it will prompt them and make them sign on to see if they're authorized to run that executable. Exclusive application security is an interesting one. This relates to row security. It allows you to suspend row and column security for named applications and UBEs. So it's useful for temporary suspensions when you're dealing with reconciliations, for example. So in general, the user may have very restricted data access, but when they run a reconciliation, they can see the full data set. It's sort of been superseded by the fact that when you assign roles, you can assign them outside star all. And that means the user signs on with that role. It's a standalone role. It's not never included in star all, so the outside star all role could have full data access but very limited application or UBE access. Solution Explorer controls the interface. Your users, if you want to control whether they can use the fast path, whether they can do menu design, or whether they can maintain their own favorites, that's all controlled in Solution Explorer. Notice under fast path now there's what's known as a restricted fast path, which allows you to restrict users to mnemonics, which are stored in a UDC, like DD for data dictionary, AAI for the automatic accounting instructions, etc. They're all stored in a UDC. You can add your own mnemonics. For your information, the UDC is H95FP, I'm pretty sure. Yes, I'm pretty sure it is. You can also, when you're under restricted fast paths, you can also type in menu names if you wish. Here is the solution. It is all again, I'm sorry, I keep forgetting to say to you, every time you're looking at how the security is set up, it is all through the P00950, of course. Here you can see how you can set what's restricted. It makes sense pretty much at the public level to restrict everyone from doing anything except viewing documentation and maintaining favorites. But when you're dealing with very specific roles, like I'm expected to design menus on a regular basis, I'm going to need to have change access on menu filtering and menu design. Miscellaneous security. A lot of JD Edwards customers came from World, which is a green screen application. And I don't know if any of you have had access to World, but there's a lot of really good reporting tools in World, like FastStar, WorldWriter, etc. And users are used to writing their own reports. But of course, with E1, you need a fat client. It's getting more flexible nowadays with versioning, but years ago you needed the fat client. You needed access to the Report Design Aid tool to write your own reports. Report Design Aid tool allows access to some very sensitive functions. They can invoke business functions. They could clear out your whole sales order, your old sales order detail table if you're not careful. So the miscellaneous security allows you to restrict report writers to read-only capability. It also allows you to control who can run workflow processes and also who can modify those processes. Data Browser is for web users. It's a replacement for the Universal Table Browser. You can access it in the fast path by just typing Data Browser, or in any interactive application it's accessible as long as you can run it from the Tools menu selection. And you can see there it's accessible now. Now, with Data Browser, you can, by default, it will show you the business view for the interactive application that you're running now. So if we would see the appropriate address book business view if we went into Data Browser. But there is also an option with Data Browser to go and look at other tables. So when you're setting security on the Data Browser, you can decide, are they allowed to launch the Data Browser? And if so, then you need to think about, do you want to give them full access to search and select so they control your database? And this is what it looks like if you give them that ability to trawl your database. They can go and search for any table, any data source. You'll be pleased to know that row and column security are still in place when they're using Data Browser. So if you've secured them out of the salary column, the fact they go into Data Browser does not bypass that security. Ooh. That's interesting. I'm sorry about the heading there. I need to change that. That's the wrong one. Oh, no, that's right. No, that is right. Sorry. Okay, moving on. Push button and link security. New controls that came in. They're not that new, but they're starting to be used more often by JDE. You can secure people from the push button and link. The same as with exits, there can be a control, and the control can do an update, or it can call another program, or it can call a report, etc., etc. So when you're setting up push button and link security, you can either make the control disappear, so it's not visible on the form anymore, or you can keep the control being visible, but if they try and execute it, they're secured out of the business function or the application or UV that may be behind it. So here you can see a push button. This is, for those of you interested, it's the P42101, which is a replacement for the P4210 if you wanted to replace it. I mean, the P4210 is still there, of course. And there's a push button, and we're going to make it disappear. Again, through the P00950, you can see our form specific. We are saying, notice the enable or view. If you want them to see it but not disable it, then you can do view yes, enable no. Personally, I don't see the point with push buttons and links, because unless there's something really informative in the text of the push button, why do you want them to see something they can't execute? Now the push button's gone. We're going to do the same with a link. We're going to make credit check disappear. Notice this time we're into subforms. This is what the modern way of developing web apps. They have subforms within them, and these subforms can be reusable. Anyway, we're going to make credit check disappear for this particular subform on this particular form. Excuse me. And you can see now, and again, I made it, not only did I make it disable it, but I made it disappear. And now you can see the link is no longer there. We're now going to talk about another of the security types, which really comes under generic term of control. But really we're focusing on text block controls, chart controls, or images. Now, making these viewable but not active is much more important with these, because these are informative. These are part of the actual web form itself. The text block control could contain instructions or information useful to the user. The chart control could be a nice chart that you want them to see, but you don't want them to be able to execute any control that's behind the chart. And the same applies to images. It may be you want them to see the picture, but you don't want to be able to click on it to activate the functionality that's behind the image. So once again, you can make it disappear, or you can make it visible but deactivate it. So we're just focusing on an image here. This is an application that most would be familiar to a lot of role relationship, and we're going to make the ability to remove a role. We're going to allow them to add a role but not to remove a role. And now you can see the role assignment arrow is still there, but the role removal is not. Now you might have to think about taking away the delete option at the top, but anyway, it shows you how the image security works. Moving on now, media objects have always been an issue. For some of you, I mean, it depends on your organization and what you do. Do you keep your invoices attached to the appropriate records within your JDE Edwards database? Do you have engineering drawings associated with the items in the item master? And so it goes on. Media object functionality has been available within JDE Edwards for a very long time, but you just weren't able to control what the users did to these media objects. Now, media objects are, of course, OLE objects, and you can see in this case it's a JPEG, but it could be a Word document, could be a spreadsheet, and so it goes on. So a JPEG's not updatable, but a Word document could be. Here you could see through the you can see what options are available, and we can secure all of them if we wish. So, I just don't know what's happened here. It's caught up, sorry. So, now looking at the P00950, you can see we've shut down media objects. So we can't even get to see it at all. You could see could see the paper clips there, but if I select it, it just says media object is secured. It will not be displayed. Whereas now I've granted only save access. In this case, it's not appropriate, but if this was a Word document, it would stop me making changes to the Word document. And finishing off now, up until now, all the security we've been talking about has been wide open until you shut it down. And this is the first of the new JDE security types which are closed until you open them up. And of course, the published business services allow you to interface with external non-JDE applications. And if you want people to use these interfaces, you need to grant them access. They're closed, and you need to grant them access to actually use these interfaces. They don't have a concept of versioning, but they do have a concept of method, which is the nearest equivalence. Now, application query security, you could argue about whether this is a security, but it's still very useful, which is why I put it in the presentation. This isn't stored in the F00950, but it allows you to control whether someone's allowed to click find or scroll to end without putting in a QB argument. In other words, without limiting the data that will be accessed. So you can force people to have to put something in to restrict access. Now, JDE Edwards are now shipping a lot of the forms by default, for example, the P0092, by default, where you have to put something in, which personally I find a little bit irritating, but if you want to disable it, you can. You can either have error messages or warning messages, and of course a warning message means you just click find again and it will go ahead. The message text, just for your information, they're stored in the data dictionary. And the message text is always that little bit obscure JDE Edwards idea of what a description should be. If you want to, you can go into the data dictionary and change the text that's viewed by the users when they do trigger one of these warnings or error messages. So setting up application query security, there's a whole load that's already in place. You can see this one is disabled, but it's ready for you to enable. And you can choose then what you want, whether you want it to be an error message, a warning message, or whether at least one form filter or QBE field is to be set up, or whether you want to configure your own fields. So you can see it's quite flexible. And once it's in place, you see what I mean about the text. Open, find, error. I'm sure they could have come up with something else. But anyway, you could make it a little bit more meaningful and say, please, if you wish to view a large number of records, please put in a relevant, at least one QBE or filter. So that's the last of the security types, the traditional JDE security types that have been shipped. Of course, the last one wasn't in the F00950, but all of the other ones were. Just a quick reminder that a lot of the security types can go down to version level, and remember that version level overrides object level. Which is very useful, because if you did want to give the users on your menu selection, you wanted to give them a list of versions to run, but you wanted to make sure that they couldn't run some sensitive versions, then you could actually secure them out of those versions and they wouldn't appear in the versions list. So, and just as a reminder, the security on the version overrides the security on the application UBE or form if you're dealing with form level. Version security can be applied on individual forms if required. It's the same look and feel as standard JDE Edwards security. In other words, if you're not authorized to run a particular version and it's in the menu structure, it won't appear. It won't appear to you. Try and use sparingly. I mean, it's been brought in so that you can let people into the P4210, but not let them into the more sensitive or the P4310. but not let them into the more sensitive versions that give them maybe access you didn't intend, cross-charging, for example. So you could secure everything at the version level, but it just means more maintenance. And this is just a reminder of the hierarchy, what it looks like. And we've slotted in the individual version above the individual object because the individual version security overrides the individual object. And, of course, that is checked at each level within the JD Edwards security hierarchy. So, having covered the more traditional JDE security types that have been around for a while, now we're going to focus on something that's new with 9.2. UDO Security was promised with 9.1.5, but it didn't quite work. So 9.2, it does work. What is a UDO? User-defined objects have been gradually introduced to JD Edwards since 9.0, but they're not what you would call non-native. They're not developed using RDA, FDA. They're add-ons. They're bolt-ons to the JD Edwards interface. An example could be watch lists, one-view reports, E1 pages, etc. UDO Security was introduced in 9.2. It's managed through the P00950W, although you can't run the P00950W from the fast path. It's accessible through form exits in the P00950. So you get to the, by the way, the W's for web if you hadn't worked it out. The security is stored, that you set up, is stored in the F00950W. This is a fast-moving target. I'm already a little bit out of date with what UDOs are available and can be secured, but this is still a valid list. You've got the Cafe one, which is a nice interface where you can have a bar chart and a URL and a JD Edwards screen all in one form, effectively. E1 pages, which are starting to take over for the menus. Grid formats, which traditionally have been stored in the user overrides table, but are now being managed as UDOs. One-view reports, watch lists, and queries. And queries are really nice, sexy, but they've been around for a while. They've just been formalized into a development environment that can be secured. So the UDO security types, currently we're dealing with feature security. The UDOs are disabled until you actually activate them. View security, which means if they're published, who's going to actually be able to use these published or shared UDOs? The publishing is part of the development process. Once they're finished, you publish, and then you control who can actually use the individual UDOs. Cafe 1, there's different subsets. There's 3 currently available, well, in Cafe 1, but with the latest and greatest tools release, there are more functionality permitted in the Cafe 1 forms. And last but not least is action security. In development terms, who can do what to the UDOs that we're going to review now. So we've already said the UDO features are initially disabled and have to be activated. That's where the feature security comes in, stored in the F00950W, accessed through the P00950, even though it's calling the P00950W. It's the form exit for feature security. Bear in mind, one-view reports on watch lists are chargeable. They're additional chargeables. So if you are going to activate them, make sure you're not breaking your licensing agreements. Here you can see the features are disabled. I know you can't see they're disabled, but they're not visible. You'll see the difference in a moment. The arrow is pointing to where it would be visible that you can actually work with, you have activated queries and watch lists, and you're authorized, of course. So now you can see I've gone in. Queries and watch lists are disabled. That's what the red, and remember this was through the P00950 and form exit feature security. You click on the red icon to activate, and it goes green. And then you can see the two icons that have appeared. Now we can work with queries and watch lists if we are so entitled. If you're somebody who's working on UDOs, you're setting up grid formats or you're setting up queries for other users, once you've finished your work, you might want to publish them. And of course, once you publish them, and that's all done through notice the application name, the User-Defined Object Management Workbench app, or the P98220W, may all be familiar to you who know your JDE Edwards applications. Once it's published, you can control who can do what, who can view, and you can then grant access to users' roles start public as normal. The criteria you can use is much stricter, though, because you can actually secure by product code, which is quite useful. So here you can see at the moment in the query manager, I can't see any other queries. I can only see my personal queries, which is what the arrow is pointing at the moment. So even though I'm allowed to create queries, I'm not allowed to run other published queries that may have been set up for me. Now I'm going into the UDO view security, again accessed via the P00950. And here we're adding for AP Clerk for queries, all. I'm doing a star all, so all UDOs. I could name a UDO, and then on the P01012. So that means now that anything to do with the address book, any queries, I am able to be able to view them and run them. And now you can see the difference. Instead of just saying personal, we've now got shared, and I'm able to see any shared queries or queries that have been published, and of course able to run them. The content security, remember the content that goes in the CAFE1 forms is, again, you can restrict who can do what. Again, with Oracle Business Intelligence reports, make sure your licensing is appropriate. If you're going to set up business intelligence reports, make sure you've got the appropriate licensing agreement, and you're going to you will then be able to control when people are designing CAFE1 or viewing CAFE1 what content they're able to see. Again, it's accessible as a form exit from the P00950. Last but not least, looking at UDO, for the people involved in development, there is the action security. So if you're expected to maybe create your own queries or your own watch lists, or you're expected to publish them to other people, you have to have the appropriate action security in place. And you can see the actions that can be controlled are you can give people access to do create. They can do create and publish, which makes sense. If I'm someone setting up queries for my department, I create them and I publish them. I can also create, publish, and modify, which means I can set up queries, publish them, and modify my queries or other people's once they've been published. And also disable, create, and disable means we can make them no longer shared or published and then do the full development cycle. Again, it's set up in the P00950 via the P00950W via the P00950 through the form exits. The actions, and this is the way JDE is going now, as I mentioned earlier on. Formerly, security was not required because everything was open and you had to shut it down. But now with these new security types, everything's disabled until the security is put in place. So here's an example here. At the moment, I can't publish. The publish icon is missing. We've now gone into the user-defined object action security, and I'm now granting to the public. So don't forget the full hierarchy is in place. We're going to be able to publish and modify. And now you can see that the publish icon, which is slightly to the left of the arrow there, is now available, and I am able to go through the full development cycle with any queries that I wish to share with my department. And just a reminder, in the same way, this security sequencing, it follows the normal hierarchy. So that's a very, quite a fast overview. Some of the topics we've covered quicker than you would normally hope. We do also sometimes run a row security bootcamp, which always is very popular, where we go into row security into a much more detail because there's always a lot of confusion about row security, and we may be able to do that in the near future. We've also had requests to focus on greater depth on UDO security, so maybe that's something also we can run in the near future, but it's all down to what you require. Are there any questions?
Hi, Owen. Anton here.
Hello, Anton.
Hi. Yeah, just I sent a kind reminder through this chat box that if anybody has questions, you can just unmute yourself and ask them promptly. So let's wait a bit.
I think I've stunned everyone into silence.
Right. Owen, would you have I have an overview of products of QSoftware. Perhaps it's good that you just highlight those products and what they typically do.
Okay. Have you got a PowerPoint, or shall I just talk through them?
No, I'll make myself presenter, and then I'll show you the PowerPoint.
Perfect.
All right, Owen, I will start sharing the screen again so that you can see the PowerPoint and the specific slide I was referring to.
Perfect.
Can you see it?
Yes, I can.
All right. So perhaps if you could give a quick update, because there's a number of new products in your line. Especially fraud detector and admin control manager that may ask some additional information to be provided. Okay.
I'll start with Task View Manager. Task View Manager is exactly what it says. It's a tool to speed up your management of your task views. It allows you to view all your task views, to make changes. You can do copy and paste. You can do cut and paste. It will look after the relationships. You remember those lovely strings you get in Task View Manager? It will ensure that if you do copy or cut and paste, it's done very quickly. So that's our first tool. It's the front end for either Security Manager Pro or Security Manager Express if you purchase those two products. Security Manager Pro is our Rolls-Royce product, which allows you to manage security, generate security from your task view design, do pre-build SOD checking, and of course lots of reporting as well. Security Manager Express is aimed at smaller sites, normally 100 or less users, and it's a little bit less sophisticated, but it does still allow you to put in place the security policy very quickly. Audit Manager is our SOD product. It allows you to the thing about Security Manager Pro and Security Manager Express was the SOD checking was over the pre-build, so it's before the data was built out to the F00950. Audit Manager is an after-the-fact tool. It will look at what's in place. A lot of people like to use it just before their audit turns up. You can either use our supplied SOD models, or you can define your own SOD models, or do a mix of both. Profile Manager allows you to. It's a user provisioning tool. It allows you. It's put a workflow process in place so that you will be able to control requests for roles from users. The users will then be able to, before the role is assigned, finally, you'll be able to do a pre-assignment SOD check. there are different people. There can be up to 4 people involved in the process, so you can make sure that there's no, it's all being pushed down to the department manager head level, department head level, and you can also, it's all driven through email as well. So people get emails requesting or informing those requests, etc., etc. And the Profile Manager Mobile allows you to allows you to use a tablet to respond to any requests. Fraud Detector is an enhancement onto JD Edwards CFR 21 CFR 11. What we've basically done is said, well, the data you get from 21 CFR 11 is incomprehensible. So we've allowed you to actually view it in tables that we ship as part of the product. You can also set up alerts. So you can say, I would like users X, Y, and Z to be informed if a credit limit is raised above 5,000 or if a new customer's added, and so it goes on. So it takes advantage of the 21 CFR 11 functionality in JD Edwards, but has enhanced it beyond recognition. And last but not least, Admin Control Manager is an interface that allows you to set up users, manage users, go through SOD checks in a very quick way, and it's got lots of grid formats so that you can import users from spreadsheets, and so it goes on. So it's just a simplification. It allows you to pretty much, because the problem is, as we all know, because JD Edwards made CNCs attend the training where they were taught how to set up users, it's been pushed into the CNC department, especially with the sensitivity of a lot of the applications used. We've supplied you with a much more user-friendly interface, which allows you to do en masse updates and push it back to the help desk, because they can update the sensitive tables as appropriately, but without getting to the really dangerous areas. Thank you for that, Anton.
Thank you, Owen. There was one question that I would like to ask you now from Claudia. She asks, you did pretty much of all the presentation in JD Edwards itself, not in the QSoftware application. Can you highlight and emphasize, elaborate on that?
Well, the whole, I mean, I'd love to have done a puff piece for our product set, but the idea was to show people, is to show not using our products and then hopefully get them interested in seeing our products. But we do webinars, some of new features within our products as well. So if Claude is interested in that sort of thing, then let me know, and I'm sure she'll be on the invite list, because the idea is this really is just to show how the standard JD Edwards security works. Okay, thanks for the answer, Owen. I think that's the end of this webinar. I see no other questions so far. Most of the questions asked, there's one from Adam Pryke. Is there a way to promote task view changes in OMW through DVPY to PD without wiping out user favorites? That's a good question. Here we go. I don't know of with JD Edwards, but we do have a tool as part of one of the functions in our latest release of Task View Manager is to allow you to copy task view changes between environments, and that doesn't wipe out favorites. So, in answer to your question, I don't know how to do it, Adam, through JDE, but I do know how to do it using our tool. Okay, perfect. That will be the last question I see so far, which brings us to the end of this webinar. For all of you that have been present, thank you very much for attending. Of course, we will share the PowerPoints and the slides that we've shown you today. We also would encourage you, in case you need more information, just please visit
or the website of QSoftware for more information on www.qsoftware.com, or our own website, www.quistor.com. In case you would like to understand better and more information, just contact us on our generic email address, info@quistor.com, or just contact us by phone. Here are our contact details. Thanks very much all again. Thank you, Owen, for the elaborate presentation and your skills and expertise. And looking forward to do the next one.
Lovely. Thank you, Anton.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye all.